A woman is harassed and beaten without reason by two white police officers, but when her husband, a black judge, arrives, everything begins to change. Will justice be served, or will these two officers continue to escape punishment as they have in the past? Watch the video to discover the unexpected ending. On a chilly winter afternoon, with the sunset casting a golden hue over the park, Zeph Alexander sat quietly on a bench, enjoying a rare moment of peace amidst the hustle and bustle of life. She wore a long dress that gently hugged her body, with a thin coat draped over her to keep warm. Her black hair hung loosely, flowing with each breeze. Everything seemed to slow down in the peaceful surroundings as the sound of birds singing and the footsteps of passers-by blended into a soothing melody. She thought about her husband, Ashvin Ryder, who was working at the nearby courthouse. Ashvin was a fair judge with sharp intellect, always fighting for justice in every case. Despite his busy work schedule, he always made time for Zeph, and they had built a marriage full of respect and understanding. She glanced at her phone, intending to send him a message letting him know she was waiting at the park. But before she could do so, two men in police uniforms suddenly appeared beside her, their cold stares causing her to jump. They stood there, a mocking smile passing across their lips as if trying to provoke her. The first man, named Colin, spoke up. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice deep yet full of smugness. "It's such a beautiful afternoon, isn't it?" Zeph, feeling a bit uneasy, maintained her politeness, nodding and offering a slight smile. "Yes," she replied, trying to stay calm, though her unease grew stronger inside. Ken stood there still grinning falsely, while Roman, the second officer, began to look at Zeph with a scrutinizing gaze. He jerked his chin toward her and spoke in an unfriendly tone. "You come here often, don't you?" Roman asked, his eyes scanning Zeph from head to toe as if searching for something. His voice was far from polite, instead filled with disdain. "This park seems like an interesting place to meet new people, doesn't it?" Zeph felt Roman's eyes fixed on her, making it impossible for her not to feel discomfort. She took a deep breath, trying to remain calm though her heart raced. "I come here sometimes to relax, and I'm waiting for my husband," she replied briefly, trying to keep her voice steady, though tension seeped through. However, Colin showed no sign of stopping. He continued to smile, taking another step closer to Zeph, making her feel increasingly uncomfortable. "You know," Colin said, his tone growing heavier with scrutiny, "I rarely meet anyone like you. It seems like you enjoy keeping a bit of mystery about yourself." She began to feel more and more uneasy with the way these two officers were treating her. They had no legitimate reason to approach her like this, and Zeph knew it. She decided it was time to speak up and defend herself. "I don't think I've done anything wrong to be questioned, so please leave," Zeph responded, trying to keep her voice calm but unable to hide her determination. It was at this moment that Zeph clearly felt the rising threat from both men, but she couldn't retreat, couldn't run. Her body had started to tense up, her hand gripping tightly onto the phone, wanting to call her husband but unable to do anything. Suddenly, Officer Colin moved even closer, saying nothing, but his eyes were filled with calculation. When he placed his hand on her shoulder, a chill ran down her spine. Zeph felt as if her entire body was freezing. Then, without warning, Roman's hand ascended onto her thigh, making her tremble. A feeling of disgust rose within her, as she felt her body violated, turned into an instrument for their power to be satisfied. Immediately, Zeph screamed, her voice echoing through the air, tense and filled with rage. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she shouted, her voice full of fury and anger. "Who do you think you are, you cowardly animals?" Her insults came crashing down like a wave, each word, each syllable filled with disgust and outrage. She wrenched her arms from the grasp of Colin and Roman, then shoved them away, her eyes flashing with fire. "Get out of here! If you touch me again, I'll make sure you won't have the face to live in this world." Her words were sharp as a knife, each one dripping with contempt for their unacceptable behavior. As Zeph yelled, the fury in her voice made the atmosphere even more tense. Passers-by in the park started to stop, their eyes drawn to the scene unfolding. Curious stares, some filled with concern, appeared from those standing at a distance, but no one dared to approach. Zeph felt the loneliness grow as people just stood and watched without intervening. Colin and Roman exchanged angry looks, but it was clear they hadn't expected her to resist like this. Colin gritted his teeth, then stared directly at Zeph. "Who do you think you are to make such a scene?" he snarled, seething with anger. "You think you can just refuse to cooperate with the police? You're causing a disturbance and obstructing our work." Roman stood silent but glaring, his fists clenched. Just as Colin's voice rose further, a commanding voice interrupted, booming across the park like a thunderclap. Beside him, his lips curling into a mocking smile, Colin sneered. "Who do you think you are, huh? You must think you're really special, right?" Zephyr couldn't take it any longer. She was tense but refused to back down, not letting fear take over her. "Do you think I'm an idiot?" she shouted back, each word like a sharp weapon. "It's your job, but what right do you have to touch me like that? You're abusers of power, and I won't stay silent about your filth," she emphasized, her face red with anger, unable to hold back the pent-up emotions. The two officers weren't backing down either, starting to argue back vehemently. "You're not cooperating, and you're bothering us," Colin said loudly, his face full of disdain. "So, what do you want, huh? We're just doing our job. How can you act like this?" Roman snarled, pointing his finger at her. "You're violating public order and could be arrested for this act of defiance. Don't you think?" The scene began to attract more people, the noise rising from the crowd. Disapproving looks started to appear, some even pulling out their phones to record, but no one dared to intervene. Zeph ignored them, knowing that she could not give up now. "You're cowards!" Zephyr screamed again, pointing at Colin and Roman. "Don't think you can just get away with this. You have no right to touch me, no right to criticize me. You're just a joke wearing a police uniform." Her voice grew louder, more tense, and stronger with each word. Colin, his face red with anger, stepped closer to her. "You'll pay for this, I promise," he growled, his fists clenched. The situation had completely spiraled out of control. Everyone in the park was now paying attention to the tense argument, and the air had become stifling. Zephyr met Colin's gaze with defiance, not backing down even though her heart was in turmoil. She didn't want to let these officers continue their bullying. And although it wasn't easy, she was determined to stand up for her rights. After the heated arguments, the situation became so tense that it couldn't go on any longer. Fueled by rage, Colin and Roman lost control. Colin was the first to act, rushing toward her and slapping her hard across the face, a blow that left Zephyr stunned. Her vision blurred slightly, and her mouth filled with a metallic taste. She couldn't believe it. Just for daring to speak out for herself, she had to endure such a cowardly act. Roman stood beside him, sneering before continuing the attack. He shoved her, knocking her to the ground, the force of his push causing her body to ache. Zephyr panicked but didn't have enough strength to resist the two large men. They were like predators in the dark, showing no respect for her as a lone woman. They even seemed to take pleasure in witnessing her weakness, as though she were prey for them to assert their power over. A feeling of shame surged within Zephyr, not because of the physical pain but because of the cowardice and inhumanity these two were displaying. They, the ones entrusted with the power to protect and serve the community, were using their strength to oppress an innocent woman just because she dared to resist. They thought her body would be a tool to satisfy their need for dominance and degradation. Each slap, each attack, was not just an invasion of her body but an invasion of her dignity. They were no different from bullies hiding behind uniforms and badges, pretending to be protectors of justice while using their power to harm the vulnerable. Despite the pain and dizziness, Zephyr kept fighting. In her mind, she couldn't let them win. But in this moment, the feelings of humiliation, pain, and despair grew stronger as she realized that these two men were not just physically assaulting her but also beating down her belief in justice and society. As Zephyr's screams echoed through the air, the crowd around her began to gather. The people strolling in the park, witnessing what was unfolding, immediately recognized the injustice and violence Zephyra was enduring. They couldn't just stand still and watch, and angry voices started to rise. "My God! Why are the police hitting a woman?" An older man shouted, unable to believe his eyes. "Why are they treating her like this?" Another woman cried out, her eyes wide in shock. "They don't deserve to be cops," a young man said, his voice full of rage. The voices of the crowd, filled with indignation, surged like large waves, breaking apart with every word in question, expressing deep dissatisfaction with Colin and Roman's actions. "Justice for this poor woman!" Another woman yelled in fury, her face red as she couldn't hold back her anger at what she was witnessing. The supportive voices kept coming, the crowd growing larger, and the power of their unity seemed to heat up the atmosphere. Colin and Roman, the two officers, began to feel the fear take over. They could see the angry glares from those around them, and this strong reaction made it impossible for them to ignore. But instead of stopping, the two officers tried to maintain their authority. "Get out of here! This is the police's job. You have no right to interfere," Colin shouted, his voice sharp. He tried to use his power to suppress the growing crowd, but the more he spoke, the angrier the people became. Roman, with an angry and impatient expression, quickly added, "Shut up. No one has the right to question our decisions." His voice sounded like an order, but it couldn't stop the crowd's uprising. Just then, when the tension reached its peak, a familiar voice called out from a distance. "Zeph!" The whole crowd turned and saw Ashvin, her husband, running towards them with a worried and angry expression. His eyes widened as he saw his wife, her hair messy, her body covered in dirt and scratches, standing beside the two officers. Ashvin could no longer suppress his anger. Upon seeing his wife in such a state, his heart boiled with fury. Zeph immediately spotted Ashvin, and without thinking, she ran into his arms. The feeling of safety and security in her husband's embrace made her unable to hold back her tears. "Ashvin," she sobbed, quickly summarizing what had happened. "They hit me, darling. They groped me, then hit me when I reacted, and they insulted me. They said I wasn't cooperating." She pointed at Colin and Roman, her face still full of confusion and fear. Ashvin clenched his wife's hand, his anger flaring up. He turned and stared coldly at the two officers, Colin and Roman. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" His voice was deep and threatening. "You're treating a woman like this, and she's my wife." Colin, clearly feeling challenged, took a step forward, his face tense. "She didn't cooperate," he said, trying to appear tough. "We are following protocol. You have no right to criticize." Ashvin took a deep breath, keeping his composure though his insides were seething with rage. "Protocol?" he emphasized. "The protocol you're following is that of cowardly men using power to oppress others. You have no right to hit her, no right to humiliate her just because of a piece of paper." His voice grew sharper, like a clear and strong declaration. Roman, feeling insulted, looked at Ashvin with an angry expression. "Get out of here. You have no right to interfere with our work," he growled. Ashvin didn't back down. "Your job is to protect justice, not to abuse power and bully the innocent," he replied, each word heavy like a hammer. "You can mess with my wife, but you can't mess with everyone witnessing this today. And I won't let you get away with this. I will sue you for harassment and violence against my wife." The crowd around them began to grow louder, and cheers rang out. "Justice for her. This behavior is unacceptable." The opposition to Colin and Roman grew stronger, causing the two officers to feel increasingly isolated and vulnerable. Although they could continue to shout, everyone's gaze was fixed on them, offering no mercy. The scene now felt like an unrelenting battle where truth and justice could not be twisted by power and abuse. Despite hearing Ashvin's words, the two officers, Colin and Roman, showed no sign of fear or remorse. In fact, they sneered as if they couldn't believe what they had just heard. Roman, who always saw himself above everyone else, curled his lip and looked down at Ashvin with contempt, saying, "Who do you think you are? And even if you're someone important, I don't care. Go ahead, sue us. No one will believe you." Colin also mocked him, his eyes shooting cold sparks. "That's right. I bet we can bribe anyone, even the judge. That's how we always work. Don't dream we'll ever face the consequences." Ashvin and Zeph didn't say another word. They both knew this battle was just beginning. They turned, with Ashvin holding Zeph's hand, resolved not to let these men escape justice. The following day, an unexpected announcement came from the court. The case against officers Colin and Roman, charged with harassment and assault on a woman, would be heard tomorrow. The judge assigned to this case was Ashvin Ryder. When the trial day arrived, Colin and Roman entered the courtroom with overconfidence. They believed that since they had bribed judges in previous cases, this one would be no different. They sat down in the courtroom, certain they would escape accountability for their wrongful actions. But when Ashvin entered the courtroom, all their self-satisfaction instantly evaporated. Ashvin, in his solemn judge's robes, exuded sharp power and authority. As he took his seat and declared the trial to begin, Colin and Roman suddenly felt a chilling sensation, as though they were facing an unstoppable force. Ashvin began the trial with a strong, decisive voice. "Today, we are not only judging acts of violence and harassment against women but also the disrespect for the law and the dignity of human beings." His words reverberated in the room, making everyone present listen in silence. Both Colin and Roman began to feel uneasy, though they still tried to maintain calm. As the trial continued, evidence and testimonies from witnesses, along with the injuries Zephra had suffered, were presented. There was no denying it. Their actions were severe and unforgivable. Finally, when Ashvin delivered the verdict, Colin and Roman heard the words they never imagined they would hear. "The defendants, Colin and Roman, are found guilty of abuse of power, violence, and harassment against women. They will be dismissed from the police force, sentenced to prison, and will never be allowed to work in any government agency again." Upon hearing this, the two officers stood frozen, mouths agape in shock and despair. Their arrogance had been shattered by justice. The crowd in the courtroom began to clap, applauding the decision. Ashvin turned to Zeph, his eyes filled with comfort and pride. "Justice has prevailed, my love." With this resolution, not only was justice upheld, but it also became a profound lesson about resilience and the power of fairness. Zephra and Ashvin's story is a lesson about the power of justice and resilience. Despite being unjustly attacked by two police officers, Zephra never gave up, and together with her husband, Judge Ashvin, fought for fairness. This story emphasizes that power cannot be abused and justice will always prevail when we dare to stand up. Let's protect justice together and not allow injustice to exist. What do you think about this story? Share your thoughts and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to not miss out on more inspiring stories. This story is entirely fictional and created to raise awareness. It highlights issues of responsibility, justice, and the importance of treating everyone with respect and dignity. We firmly oppose violence, prejudice, and injustice in all forms. Viewers are advised to consider this when watching.